You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu.
Live uncommon.
Just before Christmas, there were some serious tornadoes. There was one in particular that was, as I understand, perhaps from our folks here in LCMS Disaster Response, the worst that they've seen in their time in disaster response. So today we're going to head back to Kentucky. We had a chance to talk with one of the congregations in the area. Today we head back to Kentucky and talking with our friend, Pastor Appold at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Paducah, Kentucky. Pastor Appold, thanks so much for being our guest on the Coffee Hour today.
Yeah, happy to be on the Coffee Hour. Good morning to both of you.
So our listeners may recognize your voice because you're on Sharper Iron regularly here on KFUO, may hear you maybe on some other programs as well. You are so gracious and your congregation is so gracious in sharing you with us so that we can study God's Word. Today, we get to actually hear more about what's happening at St. Paul and particularly life in Paducah. Can you paint a picture for us? Help us understand the community of Paducah and the surrounding communities as well in Kentucky.
We are far western Kentucky people here. And what that means is that we're sort of, to some extent, kind of on an island in the state of Kentucky anyways. The big cities that your listeners are going to be familiar with are Lexington and Louisville and Frankfort, where that's the capital, where kind of the seat of politics is. That's really central and eastern Kentucky, and Western Kentucky University is actually in Bowling Green, but that's still I'm even 2 hours west of there. So we're far western Kentucky, and Paducah is, I would say it's a size is relative, right? But I think Paducah it's a good sized city here in our city. There's around 40,000 people who live within the city of Paducah, and within the county, then there's about 65,000, 67, I think was the number I saw last. And so Paducah is the county seat of McCracken County. We are right on the Ohio River, right on the border between Illinois and Kentucky. So a lot of river industry is heavy here. The big employer in previous years was a uranium enrichment facility called USEC. And I can't, now that I say that acronym, I can't think of what those letters stand for. But that was, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that was the major kind of player here. And now there's not uranium enrichment going on there anymore. It's still open. There's still some things happening there, but that's no longer the major employer. So big things in Paducah are the Ohio River, lots of barge industry stuff here. There's a couple of hospitals in town. So we have lots of medical professionals here. And then just kind of all the stuff you would expect in a 45,000 person city. You've got a mall, and I guess that's a big deal. And the courthouse is here. So I don't know if that paints a picture. Other questions you have about Paducah?
Sounds like a great place that I want to go visit now. I like river cities and malls. Malls are still a thing in some places too. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Now, like most malls, when you go in there, there's a bit of hollowness to it,
right.
There still are some things there. And Paducah has, when I came here, I'm from Michigan, and my father's a pastor in Michigan. All of my family's in Michigan. My wife's family is from Michigan. And so when on call night at the Fort Wayne Seminary, they say, David Appold, Paducah, Kentucky. And I'm like, what in the world? But we absolutely love it in Paducah. It's a great place. I have 5 children and a wonderful place to raise kids. And St. Paul's has been a great place for me to carry out my ministry here.
Now, mentioning St. Paul's, tell us about how St. Paul's, the community of St. Paul's fits into the wider community of Paducah.
Sure. The Lutheran presence here is not particularly, what's the right word, dense. So we are the closest Missouri Synod congregation to me. And to some people, this might sound like a long distance, and to others, it might be like, oh, that's just normal. The closest congregation to me is in Murray, Kentucky, which is about 45 minutes, an hour south of me. And so that just gives you a sense. It's not, you're not going, there's not multiple LCMS congregations around here. There's an ELCA congregation in town here called St. Matthew's, which in the past, like in the distant past, we used to share a pastor, in the days before the ELCA came into existence, when things were much more symbiotic, I guess you could say. But those days are long past. There's another small, I think it's called the LCMC, Lutheran Congregations for Mission in Christ. They have a congregation here. But St. Paul's is the major Lutheran congregation in Paducah. And, as most places in the Bible Belt here, heavily Baptist, Church of Christ, non-denominational. That's kind of the majority of the denominational representation here. So we are a bit of a, quote unquote minority, but that does provide us, I always try to frame it this way, what we offer to the community is the truth and is unique in that we have a sacramental, liturgical, historical, creedal life as a congregation.
How have tornadoes been a part of life for your congregation and for the community? I mean, I grew up here in the Midwest, so we're somewhat, we're familiar with tornadoes. Are they common in that part of the state?
Well, yeah, not really. Now, what I've been hearing people say since the tornado, a month ago now, it was kind of middle of December, is that, they're talking about the Tornado Alley. When I hear Tornado Alley, I think of Oklahoma, Kansas, maybe a little bit of Arkansas. And what I'm hearing from people is that, well, now that's moving a little further east. And that could be. But we had not had, I take that back. I think there was a tornado 3 or 4 years ago that really was across the river in southern Illinois. But it just like you said, Andy, okay, there's a tornado watch, there's a tornado warning. What's the difference between those two again? It was never common enough that we really paid all that close of attention. At least I didn't, speaking personally here. Even on that Friday, we had the reports were, conditions are going to be right for a tornado. Well, I've heard that many times, And so we had at my house that night, we had my board of elders came over. We had our Christmas party every December. We have a little Christmas party at the house, and then they all went home, and then we turned on the weather, and my wife and I think I'll never forget this. We were just watching the weathermen saying this is one of the worst tornadoes they had ever seen. And probably for half an hour to an hour, we just sat there watching the Weather Channel. And there, thankfully it was about a half an hour south of me. And so I'm just watching the path of this tornado and thinking through my members and thinking who is in the path of this tornado. I was sending all kinds of text messages and hoping to get a response from them. But that was a first for me. It was not. Tornadoes are not a common thing for us.
So how did the tornadoes impact the communities around you? You mentioned that this was about a half an hour from where you live. How did it impact those communities south of you? Is that right?
Correct. Right. So Mayfield is probably the city that our listeners will have heard and seen the most of. President Biden came to Mayfield. Was it right after? I think it was right after Christmas. Could have been the week before. I forget the exact dates now. But Mayfield is the city that was really hit the hardest in that the tornado went right through the downtown of Mayfield. And so the destruction of that tornado, the force of those winds was incredible. I mean, it's still driving through there. You just look around and it's amazing how strong the wind is. Seeing trees get knocked over is one thing, but when you see buildings just totally turn to rubble, all the bricks, it looks like, somebody took the bricks apart by hand, and trees just snapped in half by the wind is amazing. It's amazing.
What was the impact on your congregation? Was there anybody that was directly impacted from your own community?
We had a couple. So again, Mayfield, just so the listeners kind of have this idea. And Mayfield's about 45 minutes south of Paducah, 30 minutes, 45, depending on how fast you drive, I guess, how traffic is. And so we had one member. I have a few members who live in Mayfield, and one of our members, their house was impacted to some degree. Now, not total devastation, but they had like a chimney that got knocked over. A couple of their pillars that were holding up their front kind of balcony were moved, which is kind of amazing because you see these pillars and we're talking about, 2-3 foot diameter pillars somehow get moved by the wind. But they were okay. They lost power, of course. They lost water for a while there, but their home was not destroyed, and they've been able to stay in their house. I also have a member, a young family further east. So when the tornado kind of went through western Kentucky here, it came up through Tennessee, and it was moving kind of north and east. And so it kept going north and east, and eventually it got all the way over to Bowling Green, which I mentioned earlier. And the path that it took, it went kind of right along I-69. If our listeners have ever traveled through this part of the world, they've gone through I-69 there, and it kind of just followed that path. And so a small city there called Princeton. And I have members who drive, they're probably my furthest away members. They drive from Princeton to Paducah for church, and their house was much more severely damaged. They had to fortunately they have family who live in the area, and so they've been staying with their family, but their house was damaged enough that they couldn't stay there, and they're going to need to have lots of contractors come in. I think that work has already actually begun for them, which is great.
Well, it sounds like your congregation there were certainly a few families impacted, but it wasn't devastating to the whole congregation. We'll learn more about the impact of the tornado on your congregation, your community, and how your congregation is reaching out to serve and being a blessing to the surrounding communities in just a moment. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
You're a miracle. You know that, right? A living, breathing, one-of-a-kind miracle. You were created to stand apart, to share your gifts in the service of others, to make an uncommon impact in a common world. And at Concordia University, it's our mission to help you do that, to live uncommon. To learn more about Concordia, go to cuw.edu.
Welcome back to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
Today we're talking with Pastor David Appold, pastor of St. Paul Lutheran Church in Paducah, Kentucky, discussing the recent tornado that happened back in December, I believe, and just a very devastating tornado for those who were impacted by it. Now, Pastor, you had mentioned that only a couple of families in your congregation were directly impacted by this. And already seeing some response for them in terms of contractor and things like that, helping out to bring their home back to where it needs to be for them to return home. What about the surrounding community, like Mayfield and other communities? They were impacted pretty significantly. It was pretty devastating for those communities. What's the connection between Paducah and Mayfield? And how are the surrounding communities helping?
Yeah, so they are, Graves County is the county just to the south of McCracken County. And I'm told that used to be the big football rivalry was Mayfield versus Paducah. That was, and I think it still is, but I have young children, so I'm not quite as clued in about the county athletics here, but it is a close-knit community. And so when you drive down to Mayfield and you drive through it, it's just the downtown, that city square downtown there in Mayfield is just kind of totally wiped out. Now, not completely. It's not that every brick has been taken down, but it's pretty major. Just so have some sense. My member who lives there, whose home was affected, the husband and wife were talking with me, and she said, when we finally got out and we were driving around, she said, we were 2 blocks from our house, and I turned to my husband and I said, where are we? 2 blocks from home. And the reason she said that is because all of the landmarks, all of the buildings, the street signs even, are just all mangled. They're all ripped down. So, your heart, when you drive through it, your heart just goes out to these people who many have lost everything. I don't know what the total casualty count is at this point, but there were plenty of stories of families that were separated, couldn't find their loved ones, and some were reunited and others sadly were not.
Mm-hmm. That must be a very disorienting feeling to live in a place and then in such a short amount of time, everything that is no longer there. Yeah. A lot of grief.
Right. So then, pretty quickly, I'm thinking, okay, I've checked on my members. Everybody, no one was hospitalized. No one was physically hurt. Homes are okay for the most part. I mentioned this one family. And so pretty quickly, our attention gets turned then to, all right, we know that we know what's going on with our people. Now, what can we do? Where do you even start? Because you just see a house that's complete, like let's say there was a tree falls down on a house. Okay, you got to move the tree. But if the whole house is just caved in, what do you even do? What do you do? And so this all happened on a Friday night. And on the next day, Saturday, I'm sort of, sitting here in Paducah trying to think, what do we do? What's the congregation's response? What's our role? And it's one of those things where I think looking back on it, there was nothing to do, but everybody wanted to do something. You want to rush in, you want to help. But the way to help requires lots of big machines and lots of heavy equipment, and you have to have time even just for looking for bodies, looking for, helping to reunite families. And so it's a reminder of, in some ways it's humbling to live through something like this. You remember how small you are because you can't do anything, at least not right away. And it's a hard thing to go through, but it's also good because you learn, yes, even though I'm small, even though my powers are insufficient, God will provide, and He orders these things. His providence governs even things that are way bigger than me.
Mm-hmm. How has St. Paul's been able to respond to the needs of the community?
Yeah, so it was really great on Monday. That next Monday, Ross Johnson, who's the head of LCMS Disaster Relief, and our district president, Roger Pavela, called me and said, David, we want to drive through. We want to assess the situation. We want to see what's going on and talk about how the synod can help. And so we got in the car and drove over to Mayfield and drove through, and we're just looking around. And I think that's when Ross said, yeah, this is maybe the worst I've ever seen. And so that just gave me some sense of he sees this frequently, this kind of stuff. This is his job. And for him to say that, it was like, okay, this was not, a quote unquote run of the mill tornado. This was a big one. And so what we've done is largely is to partner with the LCMS Disaster Relief teams. I think the acronym is ALERT, LERT, Lutheran Early Response Teams. And our congregation has been turned into, I told my people, it's going to feel like Bethlehem this Christmas with no room in the inn. And it has been incredible to see volunteers from all over come to Paducah, Kentucky, a place that is, like I said before, far western, long way from the major players in the state of Kentucky, kind of out on an island by itself. These people right before Christmas, right after Christmas, right after New Year's, and we've got all kinds of Lutherans coming down who are trained to help clear debris, who are trained to help clear dangerous limbs of trees and help people kind of make that initial clearing out so that the next phase, the rebuilding phase, can begin.
So would you say St. Paul has, in a sense, become a hub for those who are helping in response to the disaster?
Yeah, definitely. We're a hub. The parking lot we've installed, they asked me, do you have showers? Well, no, we don't have showers. But the local gyms have said, yes, these volunteers are welcome to come in and use our showers. And they asked me, well, do you have places where people can park RVs? Well, church parking lots don't usually have RV parking, it's not an RV camp, but we've set up hooked up the sewer and the electric. We've got some great people in our congregation who've worked with the volunteers who've come down and tried to provide them with whatever they need to be comfortable here to the best of that we can. We've been serving them food, meals, of course, is near and dear to our congregation is being able to provide food so that when the volunteers come back here in the evenings, they're well taken care of. They get to experience a little bit of some mid-southern Western Kentucky hospitality.
So how are these volunteers working in the community, sharing the gospel of Christ with the people who really need it?
Yeah, so a big part of it is just showing mercy, right? And the other organization that works closely with disaster relief is Lutheran Church Charities, which is, I believe, from just outside of Chicago. It's kind of headquarters there, maybe in Chicago. And so when the teams go out, they start with our own congregation, right? And they try to work through our congregation and people who we know. But in this situation, since most of our people live in McCracken County, and so we're not immediately affected. So they've actually been going out, making connections with governmental agencies, and just going into neighborhoods and saying, hey, do you need, we are people who are trained chainsaw teams. We have passed background checks. We're not scam artists. We're with St. Paul Lutheran Church, and we want to help you. We want to show mercy to you. One of the things that was interesting to me in going through some of the training here is the difference between saving the day and showing mercy. So no one is going to save the day here. The effect is too large. Like I said before, you're not going to save the day, but you can show somebody mercy. And in a lot of cases, that simple act of being there, of being able to provide some kind of trustworthy mercy, is that even though it doesn't save the day, do you know what I mean? It does. And it makes a huge difference for people to know there are people who will show up, who will volunteer, and who will do this in the name of Christ. Because you get FEMA, who's going to come in and help. And they do good things. But what they don't do is say, we're with the church, the Christian church, and we're with St. Paul Lutheran Church. We're here because we're Lutherans, and Jesus says to love our neighbors. We want to do that.
What do you anticipate being needs in the future, or how will St. Paul continue to serve their neighbors in the future? Looking ahead, a few months, what are the needs, or how will you continue to serve? With just about a minute, Pastor. Yeah,
I think the rebuilding phase is really going to it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And that'll be really the place where our congregation can follow in the wake of these volunteers. And their work is, okay, once things get cleared, how do you help people rebuild? And so to be able to provide assistance, to be able to provide monetary help, and also to be able to provide spiritual guidance for people, that in the midst of a disaster, we do have the revelation of God in his Son that says the Lord is with us and he loves us. And even in the midst of things we don't understand, here's where we turn to. Here's where we find hope and comfort.
Mm-hmm. Pastor, thank you so much for making time for us today to help us learn about your community, and particularly how the tornadoes impacted Paducah, Mayfield, and surrounding community as well. We really appreciate you spending some time with us on the Coffee Hour today.
Yeah, my pleasure to be with you.
And want to let our listeners know, if you're interested in learning more about being a Lutheran Early Response Team volunteer, you can visit LCMS-LERT. That's LCMS-alert.org. You can find more information there about being alert volunteer, how you can do that in your own district, and then perhaps even serve in a setting like this. Thanks so much for joining us for the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Gulseth.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.